And good morning, everyone. We're live. Congratulations. You made it through the week. Another amazing week of fantastic food safety, food quality, amazing products that we all know, love, and trust. And a lot of times, what we do in food safety and quality assurance, people don't really notice if things go well. But Darin and I, we do notice. And we wanted to say this morning, thank you for everything that you did this week. We really appreciate it. So if you're new, pull up a chair. This is the Food Safety Chat Live, and my name is Bryan Armentrout with the Food Leadership Group. And every week at this time on Friday at 8 a.m. Mountain Time, 10 a.m. Eastern, 7 a.m. bright and early for Darin on the West Coast, we have a discussion around food safety. And that's what this is, a discussion. And the fantastic part, and I always look forward to this every week, is talking with you and getting your input and feedback because, man, there's a ton of stuff going on out there right now. And of course, if you're new, if you're a returning person to the chat, you recognize the gentleman sitting opposite me. So Dr. Darin Detwiler with the Northeast University, where he's a professor, and he's also the founder of Detwiler Consulting. Darin, how are you doing today?
Great. Here, yes, like you said, it's 7 a.m. for me, but we're doing well.
And the weather here in Colorado, which is one thing that we love to do here, is let everybody know where in the world we're at. I'm in Loveland. And it looks like you're in a slightly different background than normal. Darin, where are you at?
I am in Palm Springs, California today.
Nice. I would imagine the weather's going to be pretty good.
It's really windy, actually. Very windy. Extreme wind warnings.
That kind of ruins the day. Here in Colorado, it's been absolutely fantastic, as Elena can attribute to as well. So yesterday, I think we got close to 80 degrees, Darin. Today, 70s, and then it's going to cool back off. But no snow. It's all rain in the forecast, which is great. Everybody's lawns and everything's super dry. So we're very glad to get that moisture. So hopefully that will take place. The people are filing in here. Chris, good morning. Corey, of course, Tim is here. Good. And Tim is home. So good for Tim. Don't know if you caught that here a few weeks ago. Tim was on the chat for the first time, Darin, and he did an amazing job.
Awesome.
Austin's here. Very good. It's not a show without Austin on here, so that's good. So man, we've got a ton to do, but before we do, let's everybody join us for our ceremonial drink of your favorite beverage. Cheers. Very nice. I like that. And hopefully everybody's ready. This was an interesting week. I had 4 different dad jokes to pick from for Darin. And before the show, we went through those and we picked the winner of the dad jokes just for you guys. So here it comes. So Darin, as we've all been watching recently, a lot of activity going on in the stock market, lots of ups and downs and everything else. And I recently invested in some submarine stocks. But I checked them this morning, and unfortunately, they've taken a dive. Now you may be thinking to yourself, if that was the best one. Yeah, that was the best one. I just heard my wife out in the living room laugh.
Sometimes I know when my wife does not laugh at a dad joke that it must be good because she's trying to teach me a lesson. She's trying to teach me a lesson by not laughing.
Giving you the look.
Exactly.
Oh, wow. So Lavanya, I think that's the correct pronunciation there, is Dubai. So fantastic city. I know that you've been to Dubai. I've been there as well, right? They have some really cool food safety conferences out there, which I would love to get out to those one of these times. So let's see. So for our topic here for today, and really this comes back to, and I'll pull this up here on the screen, is you wrote a really good article here in January of this year around restoring trust in food safety and some on the perspectives of what happened in 2024 and what's kind of continuing in 2025. And at the end of the chat here, I'll put the link in here for the article. But it's, man, we are just going through a ton of change, aren't we, Darin, right now?
Yeah. And, it's interesting because I don't think that people put as much value into, no, not value. I don't think they see trust as much as other people when it comes to food. I mean, if you
Mm,
think about it, when you are a child, you put your trust into your parents or to those who are serving you food. When you are going to the grocery store, you base a lot of your decisions. Is it the taste or flavor that I want? Is it the quantity I want? Can I afford this? But once you answer those questions, you still have a variety to choose from, and I think a lot of it comes down to trust. I wouldn't buy that brand, or I wouldn't buy, that label or that kind or whatever. When we decide what grocery or what restaurant we want to go to, sometimes you look at a name and you're like, yeah, I don't trust them because of X, Y, and Z. Or you look at the location and the setting and you're like, okay, I don't have a good feeling in terms of trust. But you also have a different kind of situation. I mean, we have people who want to be able to entrust their employees, and employees want to be able to entrust their employers and the,
mhm,
the, the brand and the mission behind the company they work for. And then when things unfortunately go wrong, right? You see companies working really hard to regain consumers' trust. We saw this recently with the McDonald's, where they had the deadly outbreak of E. coli tied to onions that were on their quarter pounders. And what's sad is that it really wasn't a McDonald's outbreak per se. It was actually a Taylor Farms outbreak that happened to be that McDonald's was a customer of that brand and had that in there. But still, McDonald's was working really hard, in the morning TV shows and how much they were investing into their locations that were hardest hit by this, all in an effort to regain trust. And, McDonald's has been a company that people have trusted for a very long time. But you know who else has been a company that people have trusted for a very long time? And I alluded to this in the article. Boar's Head. Boar's Head has been around since 1905. The company literally predates Upton Sinclair's novel The Jungle. And they had been known, they literally had been branding their, packaging and this idea of a trusted premium product. And now here we see again, here's a company that their job is to regain customer trust, and not just customer as in you and me, but customer as in all the retail establishments and sandwiches, every place that is another business, but is their customer as well. So trust is very, very much at the heart of the way companies interact with their clients and customers, and also the way that consumers essentially, it's like having a dialogue, if you will, with a company, a headquarters, a CEO and executive offices that you'll never actually visit or whatever. But it is this kind of dialogue or transaction and trust, if you will.
hmm. Interesting. And it's a weird dynamic, isn't it? Because well, in the consumer's mind, this trust element that they assign to products, it's kind of a weird, it's a weird situation in that they assign risk and trust relative to categories as well. So, oh, I don't eat this particular product. Oh, I don't drink tap water because tap water is bad. I only drink bottled water, of
Yeah.
which people are starting to find out new things on that. Um,
But what's
and
funny is it's like I won't drink tap water, but I'll drink bottled water and I'll put ice in it. And where's the ice come from? Tap water. Um, uh, yeah, it is very strange when we kind of subdivide. But also, what's strange is when it comes to making trust decisions, if you will, when it comes to food, many times the trust has nothing to do with the food at all. I mean, we have companies where they made some racist comment, they were they were discriminating, they support or donated to a political agenda that we don't like.
Mhm. Yep.
The CEO was caught in some horrible situation or whatever, and we associate trust now. It's like we expand it from the idea of I don't trust the CEO or I don't trust their political agenda to I don't want to have anything to do with that company at all, kind of
Mhm.
a thing. Even though it may have nothing to do with food safety or quality or taste or anything like that. You
Yeah.
just kind of be like, I don't want to do business with that company at all. I just and I get it, and I think that sometimes people have a hard time justifying to others why they don't do something, and you know because sometimes it might be seen as arbitrary.
Yeah.
But I think that the wide dynamics of trust, um, and I'll say this too before we move on with some other thoughts on this, is that I think that trust today is different than trust 30 years ago, because I think one of the biggest difference between today and 30 years ago is social media.
Mhm.
And with social media now, people are not just being passive and looking at what else is out, what information is online. People are becoming more active and even generating content. And so you have ideas, you have experiences, people's stories, you have so much more access to information on the internet, and people, they subscribe, they become part of even a boycott. Remember, we recently had that Kellogg's boycott,
Mm.
uh, and that had nothing to do with food safety. That was all about the fact that the CEO Kellogg's split into two groups: Kellogg's and Kellanova.
Right.
Kellanova was pretty much everything except for the cereal, and most of the Kellogg's that remained was just the cereal. And the CEO was addressing a question like on one of the morning news shows about the rising price of foods, and was basically just kind of blowing it off and saying, I don't know why people are complaining. If food's too expensive, they can just eat cereal, which is very reminiscent of the kind of let them eat cake kind of an answer. And
Yeah.
people were like, oh, hell no. You don't tell us, when we're facing these issues to just eat cereal kind of a thing. And so there was a boycott of, at the time, there was a boycott that was really driven by social media of Kellogg's products. And we've seen other boycotts. I recently saw this whole like this month we're boycotting this because of this, and next month we're going to boycott that because of this. But
Right.
here's what's wild: these boycotts are not only getting noticed in terms of social media, they're getting noticed in terms of mainstream media, and they're getting noticed in terms of the economic impact that truly is a reality that I think that most people are trying to make sure that they're reminding these corporations that you depend on us for your financial momentum. There's no, you celebrate your record quarter profits. You would have no profits if it wasn't for us buying your product. And
Mhm.
if we don't trust you, we're not going to buy your product, and we will make a dent in your income, your profits, and that is being seen right now more so than ever before. So I do recognize that trust itself is nothing new. However, the dynamics of trust have really, really come to a different forefront over the last while here.
No, that's very good points. Yeah, I want to kind of talk about this a little bit more because I think it's really critical to our conversation here. Is so as Larry is saying here, trust is doing the right thing. Yes, but trust is much more than that. It used to be, to your point, Darren, when we were kids, right? Mom was the one making the decisions a lot of time on what to purchase, and she had limited information on what to go on. And one of the big debates when you were kids was generic on the cereal topic, right? The generic store brand versus Sugar Smacks or something like that, right? And in your mind as a child, the Sugar Smacks was so much better for whatever reason. You got a toy or
Well,
what have you.
majority of the time, the reason was because of the quality of the toy inside the package.
Exactly, exactly. Which you would then dig to the bottom of the box immediately and drag it out. And mom would be like, okay, well, we're going to get the generic store brand and see if there's a difference. And he'd be like, right. And then you would lose that battle, and then that's what you would end up with for breakfast. But now, to Larry's point, I think this is worth really emphasizing, is that trust now is so much more than just the trust in the brand. Because to your point, there's a battle of persuasion that's going on. So you have internal groups within companies, and we have to remember, from a food safety quality standpoint, we're only one portion of that trust element. To your point, Darin, there's the marketing group that is putting out the messaging that they want to communicate to the outside world. There's counter communications, right? 'Cause there's groups out there, NGOs and other people, who are actively working against those companies. So it's like, okay, I'm a member of an animal rights group, and I really, really hate that people eat meat. Therefore, I'm going to do everything I can to destroy these industries. I'm going to sneak people in to take hidden camera videos, and I'm going to paint them in a bad light. So there are people out there and groups out there that are actively working to undermine trust in companies as well. Don't believe me? Let me say this. Monsanto, right? People have a visceral reaction now to that company, and you'll go on these long tirades. Here's another experiment to have some fun with this as well, is get into an argument with somebody on X or other platforms around drinking raw milk. Good luck. Good luck, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't matter how much evidence I put in someone's face relative to the risks of drinking raw milk. They don't care. They don't care.
Well,
which is an interesting dynamic, isn't it?
but even the dynamic keeps changing, though.
Yeah.
For instance, let's look at when you and I were kids, right? I mean, I could pick so many different brands, but let's look at the Fruity Pebbles and the Cocoa Pebbles cereal, right? So here you have cereal, and of course we can watch the cartoon on TV, right? And so now whether it's nostalgia or just tying into what you're looking at, there was a reason why all these cartoon characters and television tie-ins were made. And of course, at the time, this box of cereal, juice, toast, milk, and fill in the blank, juice, toast, milk, and Trix, or whatever.
Part of a nutritious breakfast.
Part of a nutritious breakfast. And now what do we know? All that was crap. The juice is full of way too many sugars. The milk, well, is it raw milk or is it pasteurized milk? The cereal has got so many, not just sugar, but all these other ingredients in it. And the toast, well, that enriched wheat, toast has some issues. It's like every single thing there that they were for decades, was the essential part of a nutritious breakfast. There's questionable things about all of that. But let's go back to Fruity Pebbles and Cocoa Pebbles.
Mm-hmm.
Not only did they have cereal, but even today still they have the Flintstones vitamins. Remember that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you know what they had before the cereal and before the vitamins? Who was Flintstones on the cartoon? Who was their major sponsor? Do you remember this?
I know this. Let's see if
to the point where it was like it was not just like an add-on. It was the cartoon characters were sitting out on their yard along the rock wall at the end of every episode. Fred and Barney were having a conversation about whatever happened in that episode. And what were they doing? They were smoking a Chesterfield, and so there came a point where they're like, wait, there's too many children that are watching this. This is not setting a good example, kind of a thing. So not only did they stop doing that, but they gravitated towards the vitamins and then towards the cereal. And we can find evidence of when, we want our audience to trust us and what is doing the right thing. I don't know if I've ever told you this, but I'm a very big fan from my childhood of the $6 Million Man.
Oh, yeah.
And as an adult, I can appreciate the fact that after the first few episodes in season 1, he was supposed to be kind of like, an enhanced James Bond in the United States, especially if you look at the original movies. But that pressure for him to be the American James Bond, right, meant that he carried a gun and he shot people. And he's like, wait a minute, I've got these bionic powers and I got kids watching me. And I don't think it's a good message if I'm shooting people, killing people. So basically the actor pressured the series, Lee Majors pressured the series, the show, to move away from him ever using a gun again. And he never, you never saw them killing people. you could assume that it was implied that, wow, he just threw that guy off the cliff. He probably died. But, so it goes down to how I really like how you talked about the idea of doing the right thing and trust. The problem is that trust can be interpreted 10 million ways, as can doing the right thing. And what we've seen of late is sometimes people in charge, I don't want to get too political here, but there are people who are in charge. And to them, doing the right thing is not saying, I'm in charge and I accept responsibility. To them, doing the right thing is saying, I don't recall, you'd have to ask so and so, I leave it up to them, things like that. You keep kind of pushing the responsibility to other people. And responsibility to me is an interesting concept. And you mentioned your joke at the beginning. In case people didn't get it, this connection, I spent many years on a submarine in the Navy before I was ever involved in food safety. And the father of the nuclear propulsion program in the Navy was a gentleman by the name of Admiral Rickover. And for many, many, many decades, literally decades, he was in charge of the program. And he had this very important role, but also he had this importance of building nuclear submarines, and not only in terms of the safety of the crew, but also, being able to pull off the mission. Anyway, in talking about responsibility, he says, responsibility is a unique concept. You may share with others, but your portion is not diminished. You may delegate it, but it is still with you. If responsibility is rightfully yours, no evasion, no ignorance, or passing the blame can shift the burden to anyone else. To me, it's kind of like saying you can't just outsource responsibility. If you are responsible, if you are a leader, you have responsibility no matter what. And this is something that I've been talking about a bit lately in terms of the idea of, we're seeing this a lot now, where people grab onto, in leadership positions, they grab onto responsibility when it's convenient. And when it's not convenient, they seemingly find a way to say, oh, that's not me. I didn't know. I didn't do that, even though I'm the one in charge. And it's like, where is the person who's saying, I'm sorry, I am in charge of this, and the responsibility does fall on me? And so this is starting to kind of erode our trust in many different aspects of what's going on in the world. When, and we see this with food companies too. We see this with food companies. They'll say, yeah, it was unfortunate that some things happened, but we're going to move on. Okay, where is the accepting of the blame? Where is the acknowledging that people died? People lost their jobs. People lost money. People went to the hospital. People were discharged and may never have the same quality of life again that they had before they got sick, which was because of our product, which ultimately I was responsible for. I don't hear that. I hear marketing and PR and legalese. I don't hear responsibility being communicated, and that's eroding trust.
Yeah. Well, and it goes back to, what was the slogan that President Truman had on his desk, on the plaque? Right?
Yeah.
The buck stops here.
Stops here.
And even if you try and instill that corporate responsibility to a failure in the marketplace, if it's not genuine, that doesn't work either. So, for example, in Japan, if they have large food safety issues, they will trot the CEO out, who will then try and placate the public. And I remember in one particular high-profile issue with Snowbrand, where they had milk contamination with staff, they brought the CEO out on stage, who then said, oh no, everything is fine. Our products are perfectly good. And he drank some, and then he promptly went backstage and threw it up. There was a problem. There was a massive problem. And that company is now out of business. If the public can see through this stuff really, really easily. And if you're disingenuous in your protestations relative to your product as it being trustworthy, that's even worse if you do that.
Well, we talked about social media, but if you look at a lot of these reality TV shows and I don't want to conflate the seriousness of food safety with reality TV shows, but in terms of not only the next generation of workforce, the current generation of people, in the workforce, but also consumers, we have all these shows where people are getting 3X's and they're eliminated from the competition, or there's the elimination round, or the tribal council, or people are getting eliminated all the time, either because of talent or because they didn't get there fast enough, or I mean, everything from The Apprentice to America's Got Talent to all these different shows, right? Where you're seeing people being eliminated. And yet here, you balance that with the fact that you've got people in positions, the highest levels of position, I'm sorry, highest levels of responsibility in our federal government. And it's as if, well, wait a minute, when things go wrong and these people deflect their responsibility, why are they not being held accountable? And it's very strange because, I think about the fact, going back to how I was in the Navy, post World War II, there was a large number of executives within, the equivalent at the time of our Fortune 500 companies that came from military experience. And maybe there was a different understanding in terms of responsibility, but it's as if responsibility is an amorphous term today.
Mm.
And, when you are saying things like, I don't recall, um, commercial puffery, right? Boars Head legal team came back and said that all the claims based on everything we put on our brand, label, packaging, all that kind of stuff, those weren't real promises or commitments to our customers. Those were just commercial puffery.
Mhm.
Where does this come from? This idea of you can't honestly take us for our word. And thoughts and prayers. Thoughts and prayers has become such a empty statement. It's a filler. It's not a commitment. It's not an admission. It's not an ownership of responsibility. It's a filler.
Mhm.
It's empty. And I wrote another piece that I thought was interesting because it started off with a question, and I started writing on it. And I was talking about how there's a move right now for some companies to bring back the statues, like the statue of Colonel Sanders, or the statue of Ronald McDonald, or the statue of Burger King, or whatever, or these kind of roadside monuments, and to some extent there's nostalgia there. But the bigger picture is that it's an effort to kind of win back our trust. But here's
Mhm.
the deal, and here's the point I made. These efforts in terms of restoring trust, uh, when companies make promises and they don't follow through with those, or they don't truly prioritize those, then their promises become as empty as those fiberglass statues standing outside in front of their restaurant. And we are starting as a society, as a culture, to say, fool me once, shame on you, but fool me twice, shame on me. We're very aware of this, and I think that the executive boardrooms are starting to wake up to the fact that they can't get away with some of the things they got away with in the past.
Right. Yeah, and it's like the phrase that when I look at warning letters or recall notices, you'll see in there, you can pick out the lawyer language immediately. And one of the favorite phrases in there, Darin, is it in an overabundance of caution, we're going to recall 500,000 pounds of product for listeria. Well, really, you're just doing that on a whim because you know, right? They're doing everything that they can to avoid blame. And really what you're seeing here, and this gets back to Larry's comment, and is that what we need to realize, and this is food safety is just not documents and processes and trainings and these things. And I think this is part of where we fall down in food safety. We need to do a better job with. This is again, this is the psychology of people. This is persuasion. This is communication. And what I think what we fail to realize in our area of expertise here, Darin, is that when a crisis happens, we're not in charge necessarily, and the organism of the company takes over, and the lawyers come to the forefront, and the leadership. And it's like their number one objective in those situations is protect the company. And it's like, oh shit, we need to protect. All right, here's what we're going to do. We're going to put out this notification. What we need to do? Okay, fine. We'll do some public announcements, and we'll knock $2 off the hamburger for a few weeks to get the business back up. Part of this is everything that lives within this sphere, and we do a bad job of this, is we need to prepare for this in advance and say, okay, if our company was to have a severe crisis issue, what would we do? How do we respond? What are our communication protocols? What does that look like? Now let's practice that. How do we want to communicate this information to the public? How do we want to make sure this is done? It's sad, Darin, that the poster example of how to properly communicate and let the public know what's going on in a serious crisis is frickin' Tylenol. How long ago was that?
Oh, that is so crazy, because I was just talking with my students about this last night. I had a student who was saying that she wanted to do 2 case studies. She wanted to do like a good case study and a bad case study, and that she couldn't find a good case study. And I said, I was having the same problem as well in terms of trying to meet certain criteria. And then I'm like, well, I'm going to try ChatGTP. So I went to ChatGTP and I was saying, find a good example that does this, blah, 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 blah. And first off, it started pulling up examples. Well, this company did this after they killed a bunch of people. Well, this company did this after they paid a big, humongous, multi-million-dollar fine. It's like, okay, I don't want to have reactive after an act, kind of a thing. And it went back to Tylenol. And I'm like, that is so crazy that you have to go back to Tylenol. By the way, if the viewers don't understand what Tylenol, back in a time when we didn't have security seals and plastic wrap and boxes and all these kind of things, when you could literally walk into a grocery store and open up a container of yogurt or cottage cheese and you could eat it right there. It was. Yeah. Probably no. Someone was trying to kill someone, but I mean, if you think about it, there was some interesting methodology to their madness here, or madness to their methodology, by basically tainting random packages of Tylenol in different locations, so it looked like much more than just the idea of one person trying to kill one person kind of a deal. But here's the thing: Tylenol, they couldn't figure out any one location, any one store, any one lot number, that kind of stuff back then, and so their executives, they chartered private jets to fly all over the different place to make sure they were expediting the removal of their product from the shelves. And then, after the fact, they looked at the idea of, security seals and plastic and all that kind of stuff that we are used to today. But yeah, the thing is that people today still hold Tylenol to very high remarks, if you will, in terms of how they handled that, not only during that event, that wasn't even their fault, but after the event. And you look today and everything is, well, we're going to do all this now. Well, why weren't you doing it before? You look at this, I refer to it as reactive philanthropy. How is it that a company will spend $100 million to try to win back our trust, but they wouldn't have spent $5 million to prevent a failure in the first place? How is it that that idea of, we're going to do this in an overabundance of caution. Well, wait a minute. So what you're saying is overabundance of caution, but it's kind of bare minimum, basic expectation there. And why weren't you doing this before? The fact that Boars Head had 65 or more critical violations reported before the outbreak, and they didn't do anything about all this. Mm-hmm. Their top leadership, unfortunately, they're angry that information got out. How about you be angry that someone didn't just signed off on this and decided that it wasn't a priority to actually rectify these issues?
Right. Well,
because now no one will associate Boars Head with the same level of priority and commitment to food safety as they once had a year ago, and 120 years before 120 years before what happened in 2024.
Right. Well, and to your point earlier, okay, so Boards Head's coming on. They put out some statements, and they have a nice, pretty website where they talk about stuff, and they brought in a blue ribbon panel to fix things. But to your point earlier, Darin, they've already negated all of that information, because earlier their claim was, well, this is all puffery. Okay, well, is this not puffery now? Or have you decided this is the truth now? And how do we know that's true, or is this just more puffery?
Yeah, well, I've been writing about this idea of doing nothing and how we see doing nothing in different aspects. And to me, the commercial puffery, the different things here, this is like the language of doing nothing. It's like, well, we have to say something. All right, well, then let's be real. Let's be honest. Let's be responsible. No. That's not good for marketing. So we got to say something, but we can't accept blame. We can't accept responsibility. We can't make promises. We can't, because, we could be sued by our choice of words, kind of a thing. And it's like, well, again, that goes back to commercial puffery. It's how is this even a thing? I have to admit, if I, you talked about the idea of trust and doing the right thing. Doing the right thing for who? Because that legal team saying that all these claims of premium and quality and safety are just commercial puffery, that's doing the right thing for the company, as opposed to doing the right thing for, I don't know, the entire landscape of food safety or consumers. So what is doing the right thing? It's kind of like when we say, I'm doing this for, when a politician says, I'm doing this for my constituents. Well, wait. I love the word constituent, because as constituents, the fine people of my district, are constituents my voters? Because there's a difference between the people who live in my district and the people who can vote for me. We hear that a lot. But then there's the constituents are actually my donors, right?
Lobbyists.
So constituents is like, there's 3 or 4 different ways of defining constituents. And again, word choice, it comes down to the idea of the language of doing nothing. I'm going to do nothing because I'm going to focus on these constituents, but not those constituents. But I'm just going to use the word constituents because it helps me provide that honesty with an asterisk.
Yeah. Well, and you made some really good points there. So if you're in the legal group for a company, your sole purpose is to protect the company. That's what you do day in and day out. You review supplier contracts, and you make sure that marketing isn't going too far, and HR, and you name it. That's your entire mindset. And I think part of this, and this may go back to your military training, because I think this is really relevant here, is one of the things that the military does that we don't do is they do contingency planning, right? Okay, here's our plan. Okay, what can go wrong with the plan? Okay, well, if this happens, what do we do? If this happens, what do we do? If this happens, what do we do? We don't do that. We just assume that our plan's going to work, and then it fails, and then everybody runs around with chickens with their head cuts off, and they go back to their base role of what it is. And if you're a lawyer, your base position is protect the company, and that's exactly what you do in that position. We don't do, and this is something that I advocate for, is we don't do scenario planning and training. Okay, fine. Let's, as a company, create a crisis situation, and we're going to test our systems, and we're going to see how different departments respond in this scenario. And then if it happens for real, we know how we actually want to react. And then you can have these discussions like we're talking about today in a calm, rational space. And it's like, okay, well, if we allow the communications in the legal group to say overabundance of caution and unconfirmed reports and sorry for your loss, please don't sue us, is that how we want to be seen as a company? And you can have those conversations. I'm seeing here in the comments, right, lots of things that are relative to what we control in quality assurance and food safety. The hard fact of this is we're only a small portion of this. And in a crisis situation, the groups above us, above our pay grade, because a lot of times, unfortunately, food safety and quality assurance report into operations or some other group, they're not sitting on the board for the company. They're going to be overridden and they're not going to be listened to. And that board is going to say, protect the company.
You know, it is very easy to get caught up into pointing out problems, pointing out the negatives. But when you have an opportunity to say, here's an example of exactly what you're talking about in a good sense. I mean, it's still, I hold on to this example. There's a guy out in Las Vegas. He's in charge of one of the casino's food programs. By food programs, I mean like 19 restaurants plus 7 stores plus room service plus catering plus events, all that kind of stuff. And what amazes me about him is that one, he pointed out that the general manager of the hotel, casino, and resort, it said in the contract and the paperwork, all that kind of stuff, that he does have a role in terms of responsibility for food safety, and he requires the general manager to attend his annual food safety training and to meet with the employees. It impressed me that this guy who's in charge of the food safety division, he refuses to normally wear a suit and tie. He would prefer to wear the chef's coat and be in and amongst the kitchens and the behind the scenes, and it's seen as completely normal that he's behind the scenes. But also the fact that they do like mock trial, not mock trials, but mock scenarios. What happens if this happens? And they go beyond the theoretical. And well, let's pretend this is happening. Let's make it look like this is happening, and let's see how people react. When companies do mock recalls, the idea of let's not wait until we have to deal with a recall to figure out what to do. Let's figure out, let's take the time. Let's shut down this and this and this, and let's do a mock recall, because it's very important for us to not only make sure that our various stakeholders truly do what they're supposed to do, but it's also very important for us as leaders to look at, and are there gaps? Is there something missing, or are we communicating this properly? Did this trigger these actions from the right people? Because these are the differences behind, or the difference, between a successful recall and a very unsuccessful recall. And we know what can happen when there's an unsuccessful recall. So, the amount of proactive and, mock exploration, or being like embedded and behind the scenes, as opposed to just, well, on paper it says this, kind of a deal. When there are companies and entities out there that are doing that kind of work, that is what is the difference between everything being just on paper and for show versus this is a company that is truly making sure these things happen, that there's meaning behind what they say. I also think that, whereas some people could say, well, wouldn't that kind of really scare your employees? Every time you look at a major outbreak, a major recall, you start hearing about these locations are being closed, these facilities are being closed, these doors are being closed, we're going to lay off these people, we're going to bring in new people. And, that's alarming. That doesn't do great for those people, obviously, that have lost their jobs. It doesn't really, I'm sure, hit well in terms of the safety and security of those people who somehow didn't lose their jobs, but they realize that their jobs may be more fragile than ever. And right now, we're hearing about the current administration coming in and just firing not just a few people, but tens of thousands of people in public health areas directly impacting food safety are being fired in a name, in the name of efficiency and reducing waste and costs and things like this. And I'll just say this, without getting political, I truly believe that there are reasons and justifications for firing or replacing certain people. I even think that there may be great justification for terminating certain advisory boards. But those come with the idea of they actually spent the time to investigate and interview and figure out what is the role. And some of these very quick decisions right after new people come into these offices, I don't know how we can truly justify the speed with which a decision was being made when there's such a large, you know, large scale ramification of these funds disappearing, these resources disappearing, these people disappearing that are crucial to helping state and local and federal efforts, international efforts, even in terms of food safety. So
Mhm.
I think that this is what's resting on people's minds is not so much yay speed and efficiency, but wait a minute, you know, who's there to mind the store?
Mhm. Yeah, and it's definitely causing a lot of stress. We see it all over LinkedIn with people worried about it and what's going on. And then too, this gets back to then, back to our food safety topic, consumer perception. So, the public is seeing this as well. And then what is this doing to impact trust on that side? So companies should be thinking about this and looking at this. And that's always the hallmark of a good food safety quality department is they should be part of that group looking ahead and saying, okay, well, tariffs, right? Okay, well, we manufacture product in Canada. This is going to be a big problem for us. So let's start thinking about this now and figuring out how we can either move operations to the US or figure out other marketing or sales avenues that we can use for incentives because compared to our US competitors, we're going to be at a severe disadvantage price wise. So, how do we want to react as a company? And then we put on our food safety hat and say, okay, if we're making rapid changes in response to these political activities, how does this impact our food safety? Are we going to have new ingredient suppliers, new manufacturing locations? What does this look like, and how do we need to prepare for this?
Well, even beyond the tariffs, though, there are already, restaurants and companies and entities in Canada, for instance, that for a very long time have been getting produce out of California, but outbreak after outbreak after outbreak, this has nothing to do with tariffs or anything political. They're realizing that maybe they need to start investing into their own sustainability, their own self-reliance. And, you have American companies that want to have restaurant chains in Canada, for instance, and
Mhm.
but people want to have lettuce on that hamburger. People want to have their pickles. They want to have their onions. They want to have their cucumbers in their salad, whatever it is, right? And they just can't get it out of the states anymore. It's not only economically prohibitive; it's just they're not getting the same quality and safety in products. And so, there's so many forces going on right now with expansion and with prices, and when food prices are such that it doesn't even make sense to continue to, let's say, buy produce out of the United States up into Canada. Okay, can we invest in indoor ag? Can we invest in more self-sufficient means, kind of a situation? So we're starting to see, it's crazy because it's not just food safety and it's not just politics. It has to do with everything from sustainability and access and all these different elements. And yeah, again, we talked about the idea of subdividing and dividing things in different categories. But in a way, I mean, it's not sustainable food unless it's safe food, and it's not safe food if there is no food. And it doesn't matter if it's safe if it's only safe at a premium, right?
Yeah.
Shouldn't a non-premium food be safe? So there's a lot of economic values and there's a lot of trust values that go into food, and yet regardless of how your level of trust or your level of food spending ability is, baseline, all food should be safe. And this whole idea of um, um, uh, the GRAS, the generally regarded as safe, that's been an issue that's come up a great deal of late with
Yeah.
the new head of Health and Human Services. I in some place I was talking about this, that there's this focus on these colorants or these artificial ingredients. In reality, I mean, all food should be generally regarded as safe. And until we can say that all food is generally regarded as safe, why are we focusing on these very few ingredients here? Do
Yeah.
I think those ingredients should be discussed and examined and explored? Yes, I do. But let's put some let's put some focus on the idea of all these other elements in terms of just all food should be safe.
Yeah.
And whether you're talking about the breakfast cereals that we grew up with in the 70s and 80s, or fast food, or all these different artificial colors and ingredients. You're talking about processed foods, ultra processed foods. It doesn't matter all these things if they're not safe in the first place.
Right. Well, and here in the last 10 minutes or so, I want to kind of switch this around now and say, okay, fine. There's all these things going on out there, and one of the things that's very difficult in what we do, and pretty much in life for anyone, is there's things I can control and there's things that are out of my control. You need to be aware of what's going on out there, absolutely. But do you have influence over a lot of those things? No. So part of this is then what can you do? So if you're working in food safety, quality assurance within a company, is you do have control over that. And so that's where you start, is you need to start looking inside of your company and referencing back to some of the things that we've been talking about. Okay, there's some unpleasant things that we may have to deal with, and I get it. Nobody likes to deal with the negative, but guess what? We need to prepare for these things. There's a reason why you put your seatbelt on in your car. You're preparing for an eventuality that may occur. Probably not going to occur, but if it does, you're going to be darn glad that you got the seatbelt on. So it's the same with food safety. Okay, how do we respond to issues? Who are the outside experts that we use? And to Cortland's point here earlier, we need to make sure that those are trustworthy sources and reliable when we need them. And let's start running through some scenarios. Let's start running through some contingencies and see how our company is utilizing what we've created to help respond to these situations. Right now, the basketball tournament, NCAA tournament's going on. Do those teams practice, or do they just show up on the court and then play the game and then go back home? No, right? They continually practice. And these are people who are at the top tier of what they do. Why don't we do that? We need to put together these scenarios. We need to practice, and we need to look at this as an industry and say, okay, within my particular sphere, within my category, produce, meat, dairy, whatever, how is my industry handling these things? So you can start off with what you can control and then start expanding out and influencing in other areas that way as well. Does that make sense, Darin?
It does. It does. And it's funny you bring this up, because I recently had a conversation with a CEO who's frustrated about the fact that, this whole delay in the traceability and transparency regulations, right? And we were talking about word choice and frame of mind around this. And I said, well, look, I very clearly remember when there was the push to have labels for mechanically tenderized beef, and there was some resistance, and then eventually it got passed, and no one had to do it until this date. Costco said we don't have to wait for that date, and they were like the first company that was out and labeling if it was mechanically tenderized, because it's the same as, in terms of minimum cooking temperature and food safety, it's the same as ground beef, right?
Yeah.
The point being is that there are companies that we need to make sure that we are acknowledging the positive, not solely focusing on the negative. If we acknowledge the positive, if we recognize and acknowledge and even celebrate the positive, there are companies who, in the absence of the legal responsibility to do something, because it's not a law yet, or it's not, the implementation won't start yet, they're making decisions based on their economic responsibilities to their stakeholders, their stock owners, right? Because it's going to be harder to implement these traceability and transparency issues down the road. It's going to be more expensive to do it down the road if they don't start now, right?
Yeah.
But they're also working based on their ethical responsibilities. Imagine someone who knows that this is not safe, and yay, we got a law passed. I'm going to use a weird example, but there were doctors recognizing that they were delivering a baby, and then they were sending mom and dad and baby home in a car. And guess what? They were seeing him a couple hours later because mom was holding the baby in the front seat, and they got into a car accident because dad was so, stressed out, or he'd been up all night or whatever, right? And then they're like, yeah, well, maybe we need to have car seats kind of a thing. And maybe we need to have this be a law that, a child under a certain size or in a car seats, that kind of thing. These doctors didn't go, well, we're just going to ignore this until the law becomes, it goes into effect kind of a thing. These doctors went out and made sure that there was actually fundraising to, to buy these car seats for families that couldn't afford it, because they refused to send newborns home in an unsafe situation, even though
Yeah.
the law didn't kick in yet. So there's always examples, whether it's Costco or doctors and pediatric awards or whatever, or OBGYNs or whatever. There's always examples of those leaders of companies who, in the absence of legal responsibilities, will still look at their ethical and even economic and philanthropic responsibilities and say, this is doing the right thing. We don't have
Mhm.
to wait until our hands are tied and we are forced to do the right thing. If I know that this is the right thing to do, I can do it now. We need to make sure that we're celebrating and acknowledging and rewarding those companies and those leaders who do the right thing, even if it's not convenient, even if it's not legally required.
Yeah. Well, and this gets back to the Tylenol example. Now, imagine if Tylenol had come out and said, "Well, we're meeting all the base legal requirements, and it's unfortunate that people have been injured in this. We'll leave law enforcement." Right? We wouldn't be talking about them today. Right? They would have
Yeah.
been thrown into the bucket with everybody else. And I think this gets back to, and what we're really talking about here again, back to our subject for today, is trust. And it's being transparent and getting that messaging out there. If you're doing something good, don't be afraid to communicate it. Here at our company, we're doing this to ensure that your product is safe. And remembering that these different groups in the company, the legal group, they don't run the show, right? They're there to provide assistance and support, just like any other department. And the buck stops at the CEO. And so part of what you need to realize around this as well, too, is that don't assume that your CEO understands this, because just because you're a good CEO doesn't mean you understand food. CEOs are good at doing what CEOs do, right? So creating a team, creating value in the marketplace, getting the stock price up, whatever it is. And so you could be really good CEO at automotive and then go over to a food company and run that food company. Well, if they don't understand food, this is a huge problem, right? And this is why all of our topics for today on being proactive internally in the company and help manage up, as we talk about, is to make sure that that senior leadership understands. So if the crab does hit the fan, that the company knows the appropriate response. Because if they don't, and they don't practice, they're going to retreat to that protective mode.
Well, and you know what? If I could, I would say that, people always ask me, what do I look forward to in the future?
Yeah.
I look forward to a future where I can point my finger to a company and not have to go all the way back to Tylenol, in terms of a company that was a great example of what
Yeah.
to do, um, um, in these situations, both reactively, but ideally proactively.
Yeah. No, 100%. That's a perfect way to summarize. And so as I promised here, Darin's excellent article. Here's the link to that article on the recalls and outbreaks. Um, any closing thoughts for our audience today, Darin?
Um, yeah, we often talk about the cost of doing things, but when we start kind of flipping the conversation and look at the idea of how many people are finding reasons why not to do something, why to delay things, why to pass on the responsibility to someone else, I think that we're starting to hit a point where we can't accept this anymore.
Mhm.
And to me, being told that everything that we took for granted or read in terms of being for the purpose of the consumer, for our good, it's getting harder and harder to find those examples of where we can truly trust what we're reading and what we're hearing. Um, I think we have to remember that we too play a role in trust. There's
Yes.
plenty of people who have all the information in front of them. They just decide to look the other way, or they don't ask the right questions. I'm not saying that all the responsibility should be on the shoulder of the consumer, but flipping that conversation around, it can't be zero. And as we all know everyone who has a leadership role at any level within a company, whether it is they are the newest, higher, lowest person on the totem pole or the top person on the totem pole, we all eat and we all have families and friends who eat as well. So we need to think about the bigger picture of trust and remember that we are part of that equation. And trust is only as good as we start to ask and consider it.
Yeah. Well said. Well said. So as you talk about, Darin, so what's that legacy over the next 30 years? What are we going to be creating over the next 30 years? So I challenge the audience here today in food safety, work to be one of those examples of how to properly respond. Become the next Tylenol of how we should be responding in the industry. We shouldn't have to wait this long. So take it to that next level. And for that work, we thank you. And so with that, we'll bring our chat to a close here for this week. Thank you, Darin. Fantastic. I always love having you on. It's always the best conversations. And the part of one of the main reasons for our chats is to get people thinking. And recently, that's really what our focus has been here on the chat is not necessarily the nuts and bolts of what we do, but it's been more around the why of what we do, which is we need to remember that. So that's very important. So thanks a lot for that, Darin, and keeping us in that perspective. And so, of course, everybody, thank you for joining me. Fantastic conversation. Great comments. I love the conversations that are going on in the chat. I am reading this as we go along, so you'll see me glance back and forth as I'm doing that. That's what's going on there. So next week, of course, we'll be back for the next food safety chat on Friday at 8 a.m. Mountain Time, 10 a.m. Eastern, where I'll bring another amazing guest like Darin on to have another conversation. And in the meantime, enjoy your weekend. Have a great time. It's going to be beautiful weather. Hope you have a great time out there in Palm Springs, Darin, and we'll see everybody next week. Have a good one.
Thank you very much.